Eric Weiss, and Eric is on the faculty at Sophia Center at Holy Names College in Oakland, where he teaches on Shira Bendo, Gebser, Alfred Whitehead, and he's also a distinguished scholar at the Esalen Center for Theory and Research, where he's engaged developing a theoretical framework to support the study of reincarnation and the survival by the personality of bodily death. Dr. Weiss is also a psychotherapist in private practice. His new book, The Long Trajectory, The Metaphysics of Reincarnation and Life After Death, will be out later this year. So the title of Eric's talk today is Love and Dispassion.
Yeah.
So let's welcome Eric.
So I want to start by, everybody said thank you so much, right? So thank you. And I want to start by telling you a little story. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I asked my mother, what is God? Now she was in her young 20s, this is the 1950s. She said, she didn't have a clue. So she said to me, well, God is love. And I thought to myself, well, that's obviously wrong. Because after all, love is only an aspect of life, and God has to transcend all the aspects of life. Right? So I've never quite bought the idea that God is love. And so it puts me in a little odd position. So I want to start with a quote. And this is a quote from the Buddha, who said in the Udana 8, whatever the hell that is, he said, there is, monks, an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, and uncompounded. If, monks, there were not here this unborn, unbecome, unmade, uncompounded, there would not be here an escape from the born, the become, the made, the compounded. But because there is an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, and uncompounded, therefore there is an escape for us from this suffering. So recently I've been teaching about the Bhagavad Gita in my class over at the center, and I found myself gripped by this idea of the unborn, unbecome, unmade, and uncompounded aspect of who and what we are. I have found in that aspect a key to a kind of perfect love. This idea, which is quite old, and is at the core of all Eastern ideas of enlightenment, says that at the very core of our conscious experience, there is a pure, unconditioned, impersonal, absolutely open, and utterly calm and pure consciousness, right? That's at the very core of our being, is this consciousness. And the way we experience this consciousness is by a process of disidentification. So first of all, we learn to disidentify from the situations in which we find ourselves. I am not this situation. And then we learn to disidentify also to all of our reactions to the situation. So we disidentify from our senses, we disidentify from our emotions, and disidentify from our thoughts completely, and find there a perfect witness, which is not any of the things that it witnesses. This is a peculiar way of looking at ourselves, and is very different from our usual mode in which we identify very strongly with our sensations, emotions, and thoughts. And from that point of view, we see the world as an other with which we are forced to contend. That is the ego process, which clouds our spiritual individuality. This process of identifying with our limited circumstances is very bewildering, since once we have done so, we lose track of the unborn, unconditioned, ever-present origin. And so we experience ourselves as finite, transient, vulnerable, and needy sore thumbs in the world. At this point, it seems that the only clue to existence is desire, and we live our lives in an ongoing, doomed attempt to satisfy our desires. But this quest is never really successful. Thank you. And where was I? But this quest is never really successful, given our helpless subjection to ever-changing circumstances, both within and without, which doom any partial success to transience and compound the dissatisfaction of desire with the frustration of loss. To live in an attempt to satisfy our desires is at best a losing proposition. What is the antidote to this unsatisfying position? The antidote is to discover within the background of our own experience this pure, unconditioned, impersonal, absolutely open, utterly calm, pure consciousness. And, as a decisive antidote to the ego process, to shift the center of identity into this unconditioned aspect of our being. If and when we achieve this transformation, we have achieved two things. First, this open dimension of our being turns out to be the one open dimension of being that is shared by all beings. It is the one absolute consciousness, which is the consciousness both of the divine and the consciousness of all finite beings. Thus, in awakening ourselves to this unconditioned aspect of our being, we awaken ourselves to our fundamental oneness with all beings. And second, we achieve an utter equality, a deep, intense, self-existing joy that takes equal delight in all and every being and every circumstance. From this evolves a pure and equal love, undisturbed by the superficial emotions of clinging and jealousy and so forth. Living in the knowledge of this possibility can transform our understanding of the cosmic evolution. Sri Aurobindo and Teilhard de Chardin both teach us that evolution is at its core a movement toward divinity. Sri Aurobindo tells us that the great yogis and saints of the past were evolutionary scouts, showing humans the way forward beyond the human stage of evolution. And the yogis and the saints refer to the discovery of and identification with this open dimension of being as the antidote to ego and the move into evolutionary stages that transcend the human. Sri Aurobindo at one point suggests that the transcendence of the ego condition is no more difficult, say, than the development of a successful career. But the rewards, a complete liberation from dissatisfaction, from anxiety, from worry, and the development of a great, compassionate, equal love towards all the beings with whom we share this world, is a much greater result. The way of life that tends toward this realization is the cultivation of equality. So rather than pursuing intensity of experience or satisfaction of desire, we can pursue tranquility, peace, and an absolute equality toward all emerging situations. Now, there are three stages in this cultivation. First, the cultivation of a courageous willingness to face and to endure whatever life dishes up without taking it personally, without getting lost in fear and resentment. We begin by cultivating the fortitude to face all pleasure and all pain with equality. Then secondly, we can develop a high philosophical indifference, a clear mental poise from the perspective of which pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, praise and blame, eulogy and defamation are all seen as unimportant fluctuations in the field of being. Finally, this can culminate in an equal and untroubled joy in all that takes place. The living heart of the ego process is our identification with and our ongoing attempt to satisfy our desires. Desires are not bad per se. As Brian once pointed out to me, desire was, in its time, a great evolutionary accomplishment. It came with the evolutionary development of life, and it vastly speeded up and enriched the evolutionary process itself. What was once an accomplishment has now become an obstacle to our further evolutionary progress. For us to advance decisively beyond our current evolutionary situation, we can take a path in which we cease to identify with our desires, cease to allow them to occupy the center of our attention. Instead of working ceaselessly to satisfy our primitive drives, we can aspire towards a calm equality in all that we do. Of course, even this turning against our compulsive drives is supported by desire in some way. Sri Aurobindo suggests that we have two types of desire: surface desires, like greed and envy and jealousy, that are all tied up with the ego process. And then we have deeper desires that are rooted in our soul. These deeper desires are the desire for the true, the good, the beautiful, the compassionate and the loving, and the divine. In our current intermediate conditions, these two types of desire are struggling within us for mastery one over the other. We can give our deeper soul desires a decisive leg up if we consciously choose them over the surface desires. But it is not until we achieve a perfect equality toward all beings that those soul desires completely win the battle, and we leave behind the ego condition for a condition that we might call enlightenment. Great world-spanning love can only be founded on absolute equality, beyond the function of ego. And that equality is founded on the vast, impersonal consciousness that it's an aspect of our own experience through which we achieve an identification with the great origin of all manifestation. Class, I could have stretched that out for 3 hours, but yes,
several minutes.
So I'm feeling a tension here. Like I love what you said, it was beautifully presented, and I'm also feeling the tension of the up and out of the privileging of one set of desires over the other, and how that sets up a way. Or sets up a very difficult relationship with our ego selves, which are part of our real existence, and that we need to bring compassion. Like, by striving for something over and above, it makes it more difficult to bring compassion to.
Well, for one thing, you could say over and above, but I would rather say intrinsic and within.
Okay,
so
but the privileging is what I'm looking for.
Yes, and I'm definitely advocating that privileging.
Yeah.
Because I'm suggesting that in order to overcome our ego condition, which is such a troublesome configuration of our individuality, there needs to be an antidote. And that the antidote is this experience of the unconditioned open dimension of being. Now that's not the end of the process, because beyond that we can experience the Lord or the divine, who is both the emptiness and the fullness, both the stillness and the movement. And ultimately the purpose of this process of experiencing the unconditioned is as an antidote to ego, which then allows us to come back into the world liberated from our selfish preoccupations.
So how do you reconcile that with the notion that's been brought up of spiritual bypassing, or not meeting the other where they're at? In this, I saw Kelly nodding along in the whole thing, but I was thinking, like, that's the quote that she ended with.
Very different.
Was precisely, was pointing to something very different.
And so I'm suggesting that the more we cultivate dispassion, the more we cultivate an even, equal attitude towards all feelings and all experiences and all people, the more clarity and spacious compassion we can bring to all of our interactions. Because after all, what obscures our inherent compassion is our attachments and our desires and our fixations. This is the antidote to desire and fixation, which can liberate a much deeper and more profound compassion.
I guess and I'll shut up in a second, but I guess I just want to be able to hold them at equal weight and say that both sides of the coin are necessary. Like,
I agree.
The ego desires, that's part of life and part of what's beautiful about manifestation.
But I'm not so sure. You see, lately,
I know, I'm just going to close with that's mine.
Okay, but lately I've begun to experience my desires as actually problematical.
Yeah.
I mean, I've noticed that whenever I'm in desire, I'm in pain. And that my desires hardly ever get satisfied, and when they do get satisfied, it's always transient, and the whole thing starts to seem kind of pointless. And the idea that it is possible to transcend desire and to experience an absolute peace has become very attractive to me. Kelly.
I'm
I'm not in total disagreement with what you said. I don't,
I
feel
don't
in
feel it.
disagreement, but I do feel like there's a different way, I look at it a different way. But I might talk about transmuting desire.
Sure.
Or transmuting anger, or any of the emotions that we have.
Sure.
I think the openness you're talking about is similar to the openness that I'm talking about,
yes.
that is needed in order to actually encounter anything.
I felt that as you were speaking.
In order to encounter
right.
anything. And so there's...
but there is a...
well, I think desire, just like other emotions, like anger, it points at something that needs to be opened.
Yeah.
It does.
So there's like... So then can we open that too? And can we
well,
open,
of course, but...
yeah.
Please.
Yeah, I don't know, I lost.
Well, I've just started to really, I've discovered that what people are dismissing as spiritual bypass actually has a very powerful logic to support it. So the Buddha said that the two primary causes of suffering in life are primitive beliefs about reality and conflicting emotions. Right? So the primitive belief is the belief that we are a separate, self-existing individual encountering a world with which we have to negotiate. That's a primitive belief about reality. And out of that comes the play of conflicting emotions, which makes our lives so miserable. But if we're able to suspend the control that the desires have over us, not to eliminate it, but to suspend it long enough to have an experience of the unconditioned open dimension, then it becomes possible to transform our desires in a very simple and straightforward sort of way. Sean, you want to do?
Well, you've gone a long way, I think. It sounds like the longing for invocation of the absolute impersonal is not necessarily the end point.
Not at all.
It's more of a kind of therapeutic or medicinal
exactly
strategy.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Andres?
I think it's great that you introduced the concept of desire with referring to what Brian talks about in terms of it was invented in a very positive, life-affirming way. And I think that goes to the heart of the etymology of the word, which one of the readings of that is that it comes from the Latin decidus, which is of the stars. And that sort of brings a whole cosmological dimension to what you're talking about in terms of desire.
Yes. But what I'm interested in is we're all talking about the earth and loving the earth and being part of the earth, and it's all really important, right? But I'm trying to stand up for something else, which is the unconditioned, open dimension of being, the experience of which liberates us from all of our attachments to the earth, and therefore permits us to be an undiminished conduit for divine compassion on the earth. Yes?
I'm wondering how this relates to our mutual passion for karma and reincarnation, and a lot of the hypnotic regressive literature on that indicates that there are actually hierarchies of soulmate relationships, and there's a reason that we unite with certain individuals and not others. And so in terms of total, this radical equality in meeting humanity, how does that fit with a natural investment above and beyond?
Well, Hegel once referred to Schelling's absolute, I think it was Schelling, Hegel said this about Schelling, as a night in which all cows are black. Right? So the absolute is not a night in which all cows are black.
Clouds too.
Right? All cows are black, right? So all the differentiations of life remain in all of their vividness. What's lost is simply the ego fixation. Everything else is there, and there more powerfully and in more interesting ways.
I think we'll need to end there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.